Alright, let's move to the third method of calculating GDP, which is the value-added approach. And the value-added approach simply states that GDP, which is equal to the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country over a year, is equal to the sum of all the value added that has occurred in production. And value added is defined as revenue minus the cost of an intermediate good. So let's write that again. Value added is total revenue that somebody gets minus the cost of intermediate goods. Okay, so total revenue minus cost of intermediate goods. Let's consider an example. Let's say we produce cotton and then we convert the cotton into cotton cloth, and finally into a suit. And let's assume that the company that produces the cotton produces cotton which has a value of 100. And then the cotton cloth company buys the cotton for 100 and converts the cotton into cotton cloth, let's say which then sells for 300. So now the cotton cloth is being sold for 300 to the suit maker, and the suit maker turns it into a suit of, let's say, $800. Okay, so now GDP in this case is obviously $800 because the suit is the final product. Okay, so GDP is equal to $800 because the total market value of the final good, which is the suit, is $800. Okay, so now if you take a look at the value added at each state, the cotton producer value added is total revenue 100 minus, because the cotton producer didn't have any intermediate goods, minus 0, which is a value added of 100. Okay, the cotton cloth producer's value added is equal to 300 minus the 100, so that is equal to 200. And the suit maker's value added, because the suit maker makes a total revenue of 800, but the intermediate good was 300. Total value added is 500. And now you can see if we add 100 plus the 200 plus the 500, well, we also get 800. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward when we take a look at the national accounting system within a country, right? Everything happened, let's say, in the same country. But now let's say we have an international production process, and let's say the cotton is made in Egypt. Egypt is very famous for cotton. You may have heard of the famous Egyptian cotton. Let's say the cotton cloth is produced in England, and of course the suit, let's say, is made in Italy. Okay, so now we have international trade. The question is, how much GDP is generated in each country? Okay, so now, how much GDP is generated in each country? Okay, let's start with Egypt. Well, what we know is that GDP is equal to the total market value for all final goods and services produced. And so that is equal to all the income and all the value added. So if we take a look at income, well, that Egyptian company obviously made an income of $100. It sold the cotton for $100, didn't have any intermediate costs, so the income, the profit, is equal to $100, which is equal to income and equal to the value added. Okay, so GDP in England is also equal to the value added of 200, because it generated income of exports of 200. And so now it becomes tricky, because you may, well, but we will clarify. So you might think, oh, GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services produced. Well, the Italian suit should therefore have contributed $800 to GDP. But that's actually not correct. That would be true if Egypt, England, and Italy were all part of the same country. So for world GDP, let's say, yeah, if you just think of world GDP, yeah, world GDP is now 800, and that's equal to all the value added. But in Italy, we have our GDP is, I can write it here, Italy, GDP is only 500, equal to the value added. Right? So in other words, the contribution to GDP in each country is only the value added. It's not 800. So why is Italy's GDP not 800? So why is Italy's GDP not 800? Well, and the answer is in the definition again of why. Y is the total market value of all final goods and services produced. And so we have, in this case, okay, we have C plus G plus I plus exports minus imports. Okay, so in this case, let's say some Italian gentleman bought the suit for 800, right? So that is clearly the total market value. And let's forget about government and spending. Let's assume this is 0 and this is 0. And let's say exports is 0. But imports are also being recorded 300. So in this case, GDP is actually only 500. So when we say GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services produced within the country, it's not entirely true in this particular case, because it's only true if we assume that the country is a closed economy. Right? So if it's a closed economy, there's nothing wrong with the definition. The fact of the matter is that people consumed 800, and so somebody consumed the suit or bought the suit for $800, but we still have to subtract the imports, because imports are not only reported for final goods but also intermediate goods, so that is important. So in the national accounts, we also take into account intermediate goods as part of the record of imports and only final goods. We also take into account intermediate goods, and the same applies to exports. So even if it's an intermediate good, but it goes into exports, we count it. So earlier, when we had the definition that GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services produced within the political boundaries of an economy during a given period of time, well, that technically only holds for a closed economy. Closed economy assumption. Because in reality, things are a little bit more complicated as soon as we incorporate exports and imports of intermediate goods. So intermediate goods are also recorded in exports and imports, but consumption and government spending and investment, that is only related to final goods or capital goods. So in this case, again, if we assume that the suit is produced in 3 countries, then Italy's the suit would only contribute $500 to Italy's GDP. And the best way to see that is if you just think again of world GDP. If Egypt, England and Italy would be one world, then of course it would be easy to see that the final market value of $800 for the suit, that's GDP, and then this is also equal to the sum of all the value added, 100 plus 200 plus 500. But if the countries are treated separately, each value added is the GDP contribution in each country. And again, it becomes clear once we look at this definition. And again, what you need to remember is that for exports and imports, we also take into account intermediate goods. And of course, in a closed economy, we don't have to worry about exports and imports. And then it is easy to say, yeah, it is the final market value for all final goods and services. But in an international economy and national accounting, we have to take into account the value of intermediate goods too. And if we do that, we see that GDP in Italy would be only 500 in the example of international trade. Okay, so this is just some additional information. And next we will do an example, and that will be much easier than what we just did.